Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Have History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and when I finished with the George Pickett biography, the members on Patreon voted for me to cover Union General Philip Sheridan in the next biography series. If you'd like to vote for the next biography series, join the Patreon for as little as $1, and you can cast your ballot for who you want me to cover. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. In the fall of 1864, a quickly promoted Union general gazed over the fertile landscape of the Shenandoah Valley. Ulysses S. Grant ordered him to make the valley useless to the Confederates and drive Confederate General Jubal Early from the region. Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia depended on foodstuffs from the valley to support their resistance to Grant's assaults around Petersburg. If Grant's hand-picked commander could remove the rebel hold on the valley, the war would be brought to a quicker end. The man Grant chose to perform this task was Philip Sheridan. Philip Sheridan was increasingly seen as a man who got things done fast, a man who could think on his feet. He was small, 5'5" at most, and thin but wiry and broad-shouldered. His men called him Little Phil. On horseback, Sheridan appeared larger because his torso and arms were disproportionately long and his legs were short. He possessed incredible stamina that enabled him to function at a high level without sleep or food. For a man of slight stature, Sheridan's appearance was striking. With his heavy arched brows, piercing Tartar-like hazel eyes, chin beard, and curling mustache, he bore a strong resemblance to a Mongolian horse soldier. He kept his hair cropped short because he hated his curls. Someone once observed that his hair looked painted on. A Southern civilian declared Sheridan the most savage-looking man he had ever seen, but then related a kindness that Sheridan had shown him. Sheridan was born on March 6, 1831, yet there is debate as to where he was born. Sheridan wrote in his memoirs that he was born in Albany, New York. The town of Somerset, Ohio declared that he was born there. His mother once said Sheridan was born at sea when the family immigrated to the United States from Ireland, and some say he was born in Ireland. John and Mary Sheridan immigrated to America in 1831, the year of Philip's birth, at the urging of John's uncle, who had settled in Albany, New York. The family of 4, possibly 5 if Sheridan had indeed been born already, traveled from Dublin to Liverpool, then sailed for America. Sheridan may have emphasized Albany as his birthplace to ward off the stigma of being Irish because he was coming of age in the 1840s. The Irish potato famine brought a huge influx of Irish into the United States, and with that influx developed xenophobia that Sheridan probably tried to avoid. The Sheridans didn't stay long in Albany. They moved to Somerset, Ohio, where Philip would grow up. His father became a road builder, helping on the National Road and a few turnpikes. Since his father was away, Mary, the devout Catholic, raised her children somewhat by herself. Philip liked to play hooky from school in order to go fishing, and joined a faction of boys representing the west side of the town called the Pigfoots. Their enemy faction on the east side were the Turkeyfoots. In 1840, presidential hopeful Richard Johnson of Kentucky came to Somerset to campaign for the Democratic nomination, opposing President Martin Van Buren. Sheridan and some of the other boys, who were Whigs, went to hear the speech but hung back. Johnson began to make his rounds, shaking the hands of attendees. When he got to the group of boys, Sheridan's friends thrust him forward when Johnson stuck out his hand. Sheridan refused to shake it. Johnson asked why, and Sheridan defiantly stated, "Because I am a Whig." Johnson began to laugh and kept trying to shake the boy's hand, but when he realized it was useless, he declared, "Boys, give way and let the little Whig out. We can't force or coax him to shake hands with a Democrat." At 14, Sheridan took a job at a grocery and hardware store, jumping around to similar jobs until he became the head clerk and bookkeeper for a dry goods store. He had a knack for creating order and keeping track of things. Sheridan became interested in the military during the Mexican-American War, when he read stories about men from his community in the conflict. He and the other boys were too young to join, but they formed their own military group, calling themselves the Kosciuszko Braves, and wearing green uniforms and turbans with a black plume. Sheridan would often see a West Point cadet in town. That cadet was William T. Sherman. Sheridan decided he wanted to enter West Point Military Academy and since he had become acquainted with a congressman during his time as a bookkeeper, he asked the politician to get him an appointment. But the congressman had already selected another boy. When that young man failed the entrance exam, Sheridan was selected to replace him, passing the exam and entering the Corps of Cadets in July 1848. Sheridan's roommate was Henry Slocum, a former schoolteacher. After 10 p.m., when all lights were to be extinguished, Sheridan would put a blanket over the window, and by the light of a single candle or lamp would be tutored by Slocum, particularly in algebra, a subject Sheridan struggled in. On the parade ground one day, Sheridan and the cadets were drilling when William Terrell, a cadet sergeant, ordered Sheridan to close up on the man beside him. Sheridan believed he was the requisite distance from the other cadet and declared, "I'll run you through," and brandished his bayonet. Sheridan returned to the ranks, but the animosity remained. The next day, Sheridan knocked Terrell upside the head, and a fight broke out that had to be stopped by an officer. Sheridan was suspended from West Point for 1 year, as opposed to being expelled, as many had been because of fighting. When Sheridan returned, he was now in the graduating class that included James McPherson, John Bell Hood, John Schofield, and Joshua Seal. Robert E. Lee was the new superintendent. He graduated 34th out of a class of 52. His first assignment as a brevet second lieutenant was at Fort Duncan in Texas. On the Texas frontier, Sheridan was continually on the move, chasing Indians that he could never engage with directly. He also became adept at hunting, supplying the 1st Infantry Regiment with wild game. He learned Spanish from a Mexican guide and captured and studied colorful birds living in the region. In November 1854, Sheridan was promoted to second lieutenant, no longer a brevet promotion, and transferred to the 4th U.S. Infantry stationed in California. Little Phil first traveled to New York, where he temporarily commanded a detachment of new recruits destined for California. The group then sailed for the Isthmus of Panama, crossing it in the insufferable July heat. Quickly upon reaching California, he was sent to the Oregon Territory to survey a railroad route. He would replace John Bell Hood as the head of the mounted escort for the expedition's leader. The leader was Major Gabriel Rains. When the group made it to the Columbia River, it was ordered to subdue some Yakima Indians, who were rising up due to white encroachment on their land. The group found some Yakima, and Sheridan suggested to Rains that he could lead the dragoons into a canyon behind the Indians and trap the group between 2 U.S. forces. Rains rejected the suggestion, and the Yakima got away. Sheridan was irate at the inaction of Rains. In March 1856, Sheridan was given his first independent command in the form of a rescue mission to save some white settlers trapped in the Middle Cascades blockhouse. On the 27th, he chose 6 men to help him scout the Indian position. They got within sight of the enemy, and they began to taunt and shoot at the U.S. soldiers. One bullet grazed Sheridan's nose, while another one hit one of his comrades in the neck, severing his spinal cord. Despite his attempt, Sheridan couldn't bring the Indians to battle. He sent his report for the day's action, and then sat down to devise another plan to get to the blockhouse. The ship The Bell that brought Sheridan and his men to the current location brought a large flat-bottomed boat that he hoped to use to bring his men upriver, concealing themselves behind a 2-mile-long island in the middle of the waterway. He and his 40 dragoons quickly discovered that rapids prevented them from rowing it upriver. They had to drag the boat using ropes. While doing this, they ran into a camp of Native American women, whom they got to help pull the boat. They made it to the blockhouse without incident and rescued the settlers. On their way back, they discovered a group of Indians on the island, who claimed they had nothing to do with the fight on the 27th. Sheridan checked their muskets and discovered powder residue and put them under arrest. Later, Sheridan's commander held a court and found 9 of them guilty, and they were hanged. Sheridan and his command then moved to Fort Yamhill. An incident occurred on the station's parade ground when a medicine woman was killed, shot 16 times by tribesmen in retribution for a patient dying under the woman's care. The act of killing a doctor whose patient died was a custom of that particular tribe. Sheridan met with the Indians and demanded that they give up the 16 men responsible for the death of the woman. They refused, and Sheridan captured the entire camp, threatening them if they didn't turn over their perpetrators. The killers were surrendered, and Sheridan placed them in chains. While in the Northwest, Sheridan took a Native American lover, a woman named Sidney O, the daughter of a Willamette Valley Indian chief. Sheridan spent the next few years in that territory, occupying the area and warding off Native American attacks. However, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln got elected as President of the United States, and the secession winter began. Southern soldiers began leaving the ranks as their states left the Union. Sheridan watched them walk away from the old army and join a new one. With officers leaving, it made way for quick promotion. Sheridan found himself going from a second lieutenant, which he had been for 8 years, and became a captain in just a few short months. He wanted to join the impending war, but needed to be relieved from his current duty station. His commanders sent Captain James Archer to replace him, but Sheridan refused to leave his post because he felt that Archer was too Southern in his leanings. He was right. Archer left the Army in July 1861 to join the Confederacy. Eventually, Sheridan was relieved by someone he trusted to be loyal to the Union, and he set off for the East. He traveled through his hometown, Somerset, Ohio, to visit family and friends. Sheridan wrote that he was untainted by politics, nor had it been disturbed by any discussion of the questions out of which the war grew. He told some friends and neighbors, "This country is too great and good to be destroyed." At the end of 1861, he reported to Jefferson Barracks outside of St. Louis, Missouri, but instead of getting a command, he was assigned to audit the department's disordered ledgers by Major General Henry Halleck. With millions of dollars unaccounted for, Sheridan needed to use his old bookkeeping skills to right some wrongs. The former department head, John C. Fremont, attempted to get an ironclad fleet to monitor the rivers. Overcharging the army led to some businessmen and some soldiers pocketing the surplus. Sheridan found the fraud, and it resulted in Brigadier General Justice McKinstry being court-martialed, convicted of fraud, and dismissed from the army. After that, Sheridan was made Chief Commissary and Chief Quartermaster of the Army of the Southwest under Brigadier General Samuel Curtis. As the Union Army in Missouri moved to approach the Confederate Army of Earl Van Dorn in early 1862, Sheridan built and set up mills to thresh corn and wheat to feed Curtis's army. He became a ruthless commissary quartermaster, but he kept the army fed. When some Union soldiers stole some Southern civilian horses and attempted to sell them to Sheridan, Sheridan discovered the ruse, confiscated the horses, and refused to pay the men. Curtis heard that Sheridan refused to pay the soldiers for resources they earned honestly and ordered Sheridan to pay them. Sheridan refused. "No authority can compel me to jayhawk or steal. If those under my supervision are allowed to do so, I respectfully ask the general to relieve me from duty in this district." Curtis wrote Sheridan up for disobedience of orders, but the charges were never brought against Sheridan, but Little Phil did return to St. Louis. Halleck assigned Sheridan the task of obtaining horses for the army in the Midwestern states along the Mississippi River. He found about 400 horses, but also heard about a bloody battle that happened in Tennessee. The Battle of Shiloh was a Union victory, and stories of the battle captivated Sheridan's mind. He raced back to St. Louis and called on Halleck to send him to Tennessee or Mississippi, but Halleck wasn't there. He was himself going to Tennessee to take control of the situation. Sheridan convinced the adjutant general in St. Louis to give him an assignment in Mississippi. This I consider the turning point in my military career, and shall always feel grateful to Colonel Kelton for his kindly act, which so greatly influenced my future. When Sheridan made it to Pittsburgh Landing, the site of the Battle of Shiloh, Halleck put him to work building corduroy roads toward Corinth, Mississippi. He was also brought in to bring order to Halleck's headquarters and paperwork. There he began to make friends with higher-ranking officers like William T. Sherman and Gordon Granger. Both men recommended him for field command, seeing his interest in such an assignment. Granger was finally able to get him named the commander of the 2nd Michigan Cavalry in May 1862 as a colonel. Within 2 weeks of becoming the colonel of that regiment, Sheridan was promoted to command of the entire brigade. Outside of Booneville, Sheridan's new command came under attack by a large Confederate cavalry force under James Chalmers. Sheridan's command was horribly outnumbered. He repeatedly called for reinforcements, but decided to take matters into his own hands, dispatching 2 companies to take a small trail and hit the rebels in the left flank and rear. Sheridan planned to hit the enemy on the flank and in the front at the same time. What aided the attack was the introduction of a train whistle sounding. The enemy and Sheridan's force thought it signaled Union reinforcements, but in reality the train contained feed for the horses in the Union Army. The combination of factors led to Sheridan defeating a much larger enemy in his first battle of the Civil War. Immediately, others began to recognize the skill and abilities of Sheridan. Major General William S. Rosecrans wrote, "More cavalry massed under such an officer will be of great use to us. Sheridan ought to be made a brigadier." Generals Gordon Granger, Horatio Wright, and Alexander Osboth signed an endorsement that stated, "Brigadiers are scarce, good ones scarcer." The undersigned urged the promotion of Sheridan. He is worth his weight in gold. Sheridan ought to be made a brigadier. Although the promotion didn't come in until September 13th, it dated from July 1st, making Sheridan a brigadier. On paper, Sheridan rose from captain to brigadier in about 6 weeks. Along with the promotion, Sheridan was ordered to join the Army of the Ohio as it chased the Confederate Army under Braxton Bragg into Kentucky. Before he left, the 2nd Michigan Cavalry presented him with a large black horse that stood 17 hands high. Sheridan named him Renzi after the town in Mississippi. Sheridan made it into Kentucky in time for the Battle of Perryville, where he was given command of a division under the command of Charles Gilbert. Sheridan attacked the Confederates at Doctors Creek, but under orders from his superiors, he didn't press the Confederates. He and his division didn't take part in the fiercest of the fighting on the Union left. In the battle, William Terrell, the man Sheridan fought at West Point and was suspended because of, was killed. The two men had forgiven each other a short time before the battle. Following the tactical defeat but strategic victory for the Union at Perryville, the Union Army moved back into Tennessee. Sheridan remained around Nashville as the Army got reorganized and named the Army of the Cumberland. He would now command a division in the right wing of the Army, led by Alexander McCook. The Army waited in Nashville, getting supplied for its push against Bragg's Army of Tennessee, camped in and around Murfreesboro, Tennessee. In late December, the Union Army lumbered out of Tennessee's capital and pushed southeastward. December 31st, 1862 had just been ushered in, and Sheridan and his friend and former West Point roommate, Joshua Sill, were talking. Sill now commanded a brigade in Sheridan's division. Both men heard the sounds of marching men coming from the enemy's lines. The new commander of the army, William S. Rosecrans, planned to strike the Confederate right flank later that morning, but Sheridan feared that they would be attacked before Rosecrans' plan could come to fruition. Sheridan and Sill alerted their wing commander, McCook, but he brushed off the threat, saying in a few hours the rebels would have their hands full with the Union's own attack. Sheridan and Sill refused to discount what they heard, and Sheridan readied his entire division for a possible attack, unlike the rest of the wing. A massive Confederate assault caved in the extreme right flank of the Union Army. For the most part, Sheridan's division was the only one to make a determined stand, but it cost Sheridan his friend and brigade commander Joshua Sill. He was killed early in the attack. With the units on his right and left caving in, Sheridan had to pull back. He and his men hunkered down in a limestone outcropping near a cedar break that would be forever known as the Slaughter Pen. With his single division, Sheridan held out against repeated assaults by multiple Confederate divisions. He moved from flank to flank, inspiring his men to hold the ground, giving enough time for the Army commander to restore order closer to the Nashville Pike, the link between the Army and Nashville. One newspaper correspondent remarked that Sheridan was more than magnetic, he was electric. His men began to run out of ammunition and realized he couldn't hold the position any longer without disaster befalling his entire command, so he begrudgingly fell back. As he got closer to the Nashville Pike, Rosecrans found him. Sheridan was cursing as his men withdrew and the rebels pressed them. Rosecrans, a very religious man, remarked, "Remember, the first bullet may send you to eternity." Sheridan pulled his division back to the Pike and defended it against more rebel attacks. New Year's Day brought no major action as both armies assessed the situation. January 2nd saw fighting on the Union left. Sheridan's men played no significant role. The engagement ended with the Confederates unable to move the Union Army from the field. Sheridan's division was devastated by the fight. Thousands of men were casualties, and all three of Sheridan's brigade commanders had been killed. Following the battle, the army was reorganized. Sheridan's wing, commanded by McCook, was now dubbed the 20th Corps, and new brigade commanders were chosen for Sheridan's division. Sheridan had learned to command a division quickly, and he threw himself into his duties like he always did. He wrote, "I had to study hard to be able to master all the needs of such a force to feed and clothe it, and guard all its interests. When undertaking these responsibilities, I felt that if I met them faithfully, recompense would surely come through the hearty response that soldiers always make to conscientious exertion on the part of their superiors. He expected discipline. When it was found that multiple officers abandoned their colors and their men at Stone's River, he made a disgraceful spectacle of them. The whole division formed a hollow square. The cowardly officers were ordered to hand their swords over to Sheridan's black servant because Sheridan didn't want to humiliate any soldier by touching the sullied weapons. Then the servant cut the ranks off their uniforms, and now former officers were drummed out of the division. Acting Quartermaster Sergeant of the 73rd Illinois, Henry Castle, rode to division headquarters one day and nearly ran over a man in his shirt sleeves, sitting on a stump and smoking a cigar. The man in his shirt sleeves asked who Castle was, and he told him that he needed advice on obtaining cattle. The man puffed on his cigar and commenced to tell him how to go about getting the cattle, butchering them, and distributing them. As they talked, an officer came up to the man in his shirt sleeves and saluted him, addressing him as General Sheridan. Castle apologized for his actions, hoping not to be punished for his words. Sheridan was modest. He told the man not to worry. How could he have known his rank? He didn't have his coat on. After assuaging Castle's fears, the acting quartermaster sergeant went on his way. By the summer of 1863, the Army of the Cumberland began its move against its nemesis in what became the Tullahoma Campaign, pressing the Confederates through Middle Tennessee and all the way to Chattanooga. Rosecrans dispatched Sheridan to Bridgeport, Alabama to help construct a bridge. Bridging started on August 29th and finished on September 1st, an incredible feat. The respected Union Major General George Thomas was traveling with Sheridan aboard a train to look over the bridge. As the two men talked, the train came to a stop. Sheridan went to the conductor and demanded the train to be started forward, but he refused, saying he only took orders from the military railroad superintendent. Sheridan punched him 3 or 4 times and kicked him off the train, then ordered the train moving. The Army of the Cumberland then began their journey over Lookout Mountain into Georgia and around Chattanooga, finding the Confederates had left the city. Sheridan utilized local scouts with partiality to East Tennesseans who were proud Union men to find the Confederate forces once his men got through the mountains. Sheridan's force was on the right or southern flank of the army when it got into northern Georgia, and Rosecrans called for the army to concentrate. On September 18th, fighting began along Chickamauga Creek around the 14th Corps led by George Thomas. The rest of the army moved to give him aid. Sheridan's division came up the Lafayette Road and engaged with Confederate right, holding them in place until nightfall brought an end to the fighting in his sector. The next day, the Confederates planned to launch a massive assault spearheaded by James Longstreet, newly arrived from Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. When the Union division of Thomas Wood mistakenly moved and created a gap in the Union battle line, Longstreet's men attacked through it, splitting the Federal line in half. Sheridan's men got battered unmercifully. With his flanks caved in and his brigade commanders being shot down, he had no choice but to pull back. He met with Rosecrans, who told him to move to the Dry Valley Road and guard it, as it was the fastest route for the retreating Union army to make it back to Chattanooga. Sheridan formed what was left of his division and did as he was told. As he moved toward Chattanooga, he got word that Thomas was holding what was left of the Union army together on Horseshoe Ridge and Snodgrass Hill. Sheridan went to Rossville, north of Thomas's position, then doubled back, putting himself in supporting distance of the Virginian. When he asked Thomas how he could help, Thomas told him to cover his withdrawal, which he did. On the way to Rossville during the withdrawal, Sheridan and Thomas came together. Sheridan made them a seat from a fence rail. They sat down, and Sheridan waited for Thomas to speak, but he just stared in silence. According to Sheridan, Thomas looked very much exhausted, seemed to forget what he stopped for, and said little or nothing of the incidents of the day, his quiet, unobtrusive demeanor communicating a gloomy rather than a hopeful view of the situation. The Army of the Cumberland streamed into Chattanooga and prepared its defenses. The Confederates sluggishly pursued and began occupying the ridges and mountains surrounding the city, laying siege to it. Sheridan settled in with the rest of his division for a rough couple of months.